Okay, we'll be live in about 10 seconds, I think. Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Women Unleashed, creating intergenerational transformation through the power of speaking from your heart and unleashing the power of your story. This morning, it's Sunday for me, the 6th of March in Australia, and it'll be Saturday afternoon for my special guest. And we are talking about streamlining your journey to authentic expansion, ease, and joy. My beautiful guest, Claire Jones, is going to take us through a journey, a long journey of becoming becoming clear and becoming aligned with who you really are deep down and what you're really capable of in spite of the murkiness of what's going on around. And so Claire will be speaking with us about her journey to experiences that for some of you may be a little bit confronting. It involves suicide attempts, it involves stories of being attacked. And so if you are finding yourself at a place that this is a little bit triggering or confronting for you, I encourage you to take care of yourself. I also encourage you to take a breath, and if it's in your heart, to stay with us and listen, because our aim is to serve you. Our aim is to be able to hold your hand, give you hope, give you inspiration, give you strength. You are either in the journey of overcoming a similar adversity, you have overcome the adversity and wanting to find out how you can best use the gift of that experience in order to help others. We are all one here, and especially being women, it's time for us to rise and shine, find our voice, unleash the power of our story, and contribute to how the generations to come will evolve cosmically and consciously. Now, my name is Grace Harris. I am your host. I am an author and an international speaker and a coach for women. And my guest from Liminal Clarity is what she calls the framework and the business that she offers to people. Claire Jones is with me today. Claire, I want to welcome you and thank you so much for being here. I am so excited. How are you?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be voicing these stories on a public platform because we all need to hear them and know that we're not alone.
Yes, yes. So I'd like to begin. I've chosen to call this show Streamlining Your Journey to Authentic Expansion, Ease, and Joy because it is what you have communicated with me via a brief. And I really resonated with that because from the very little of I know of your journey, it took you a long time, 8 years to be exact, to get from feeling that is this it? Is there nothing from nowhere else for me to get to now to a place of finding your voice and allowing people to go through a journey and helping them. So take me back, Claire. That would be 2014 or 2013. What were the experiences that had catapulted you to this journey of deep, 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 dark experience and rebirthing?
hmm Yeah, well, for most of my life, I've always been a very accomplished woman, accomplished person in the world. And I always had my next step planned out for me, what my next school was going to be, what my next program was going to be, what my next job was going to be. And so I was coming out of a year-long internship program at the beginning of 2013, and I didn't have the next step planned out. And it was a very hard place to be in. And I was in the art industry at the time doing arts administration and management for nonprofit arts organizations. And that industry was very hit hard by the Great Recession. And so there were very few jobs available in my chosen industry at the time. And as someone who really prided myself on being able to work well in jobs and achieve a lot in the responsibilities that I was given, not being able to find a job was a very hard blow to my self-esteem and my confidence. And I spent, I think I started looking for jobs in January of 2013. And by June, I still hadn't found any. And I had even expanded to looking for like apartment manager jobs and retail jobs and like anything I could find anywhere. I was willing to move across the country. I was willing to work for minimum wage. I was willing to do anything to get a job. And the best that I could find was selling hair straighteners at a kiosk in the mall for minimum wage and commission. And I had never owned a hair straightener my entire life. And that was the only job that I could find. And so that was a huge blow to my confidence and my self-esteem. But at the same time, coming out of the internship program, all of the friends that I had made during that program moved and went on to their own opportunities. And so I was left by myself in a city that I didn't really enjoy that much, without any job prospects, without any friends. And I had felt abandoned by my family as well. And I had nowhere to go at that point in time beyond my hair straightener kiosk job, where I got hit on and yelled at by the general public. It was a really hard place to be in. And then I ended up getting raped that summer in a violent sexual assault. And that was really what triggered the deepest depressive episode that I've ever experienced.
Wow. I mean, like it's anything that we can do is great. Like, and whatever is the job, but it wasn't so much that it was what you ended up with as selling the hair straighteners, but everything else that surrounded that situation. Being, abandonment by family is a big thing, and abandonment, even if your friends wished you well, but by them moving on and you being left behind, that would have compounded the feeling of isolation. And so my heart goes out to you because you would have been very young then. I have a daughter who would be similar age, so I'm as a mother, I send young Claire lots of love because I believe that when we heal the now, we really are healing the past, and the future is going to be different. So
Mhm.
Claire, take me through. You talk about 8 years, 8 long years of having to, because I know that you were sexually attacked not only once,
Mhm.
and you started thinking about ending.
Mhm.
Not consciously thinking about ending, but you had these thoughts of
Mhm.
ending your life. So take me through this journey of, were you consciously looking for yourself, looking for healing, looking for a way? What were you doing in the 8 years?
Well, most of that happened in 2013. So I did have some trips back to my home and my family at the end of that summer. And I was just in such a foul mood because of the depressive state that I was in, that I was lashing out at everyone around me. And it was actually my stepdad who identified what I was going through as depression. I was like, why do I feel so bad? And he was like, well, you're depressed. And I was like, whoa, like I was like, I hadn't even identified that for myself until that point. And so I was like, okay, now I have a word that I can deal with now. And so that was kind of like the itty bitty seed of me starting to realize what was going on. And since I had really failed to find any type of gainful employment up until that point, I decided to move out of the city that I didn't like to Seattle because I had already loved Seattle. I had already experienced Seattle. So if I had no reason to move, I was just going to move to a city that I already loved. And I ended up moving in with a old roommate of mine from college because she was already in the Seattle area. And in my mind, I thought that that move was going to fix everything. I was like, I'm going to get out of this town. I'm going to be with a friend. I'll have some type of social support structure. But then a couple months into me living in Seattle, I still felt horrible. I still had trouble finding a job. And that's when those thoughts started to occur. And it wasn't like they were consciously created. It's just that there were some self-harming thoughts that would pop up randomly, like intrusive thinking throughout the day. Like, what if you just decided to do this? Or what if this happened? And like, it was just self-harming activities. And that's when the red flags started to really pop up for me, because I had already identified that I was going through a depression. And then having those intrusive thoughts show up randomly, I was like, okay, this is getting way more serious than I thought it was. And that's when I started reaching out for help. And so thankfully, Washington State offers free mental health services to low income people. And so because I was unable to really find any gainful employment at the time, I was able to qualify for a lot of those programs. And so I actually got a county appointed counselor during that time. And that's when I really started to get the more emotional and mental support that I needed during that time. And that was really the beginning of it. And from there, I went into reading more about it, trying different mythologies, trying different, pretty much anything to get me out of that funk.
Mm. This conversation about mental health is sometimes very, very understated because a lot of people out there have the, I used to, especially myself, I used to have the impression that it has to be very formalized. You have to actually see a professional to be able to even touch the subject of why am I feeling so bad?
Mm-hmm.
And for you to mention about your stepdad just offering a seed of perhaps an avenue that you can explore, I think is very, very loving of him, you know, because it gives a person a purpose to inquire about the feelings that are going through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because the other side of this little conversation, little segment of our conversation is purpose. A lot of people out there also believe that purpose is something really big, that is something really flashy, and it's something very attractive, and it's something like, you know, it's like the holy grail of your life. And I believe, you know, it's quite the contrary. Purpose is, this is the purpose, to live and to breathe and to feel the joy and the ease and the expansion in the moment. You know, like imagine like a woman giving birth, for example. The only purpose she has is to really push that baby out. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. This is the purpose now. So it's so getting to know yourself and being able to inquire. I'm thinking about you in Seattle and having this purpose of I'm going to be surrounded by new environment. I'm going to be feeling better. That was the purpose, and yet it didn't come through, and you just kept pushing through and getting help for yourself. So Claire, what was when it comes to the intrusive thoughts? Now, this is also uh, more common than we think, right? We Many of us just have this passing thought, and because a lot of people tend to ignore it or suppress it, it can get bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to ask you a question. When you first noticed these funny, weird, intrusive, horrific kind of casual thoughts about, well, let's just do something to end or something like that, how did you start to process the conversation, or were you very open about it? Were you, because I know when you say counselor, it's a lot of talk therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where does the feeling of trust comes in, like trusting a stranger about what's going
Mm-hmm.
on inside of you? How was that experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I was just driving on so much anger and frustration at that time. And we briefly talked about this before we jumped on the live. Like, frustration was really my driving emotion behind a lot of this development journey for me, because I knew I was capable of so much more. Like, I knew that I had this power inside of me that was capable of achieving incredible impact. And yet I couldn't make traction anywhere. And so I went into the counselor relationship with a lot of anger. And so she kind of just became a recipient for my anger. And so it wasn't like I don't know if I had to necessarily build that much trust with her, because I just needed a target for my anger at that point in time. And she acted as that for a significant, or at least the beginning of our relationship. And I saw her for about 2 years. And in that time, I was able to get to, from the dysfunctional state that I started in, to a baseline functional state. And that's after that 2 year kind of relationship with her, that's when I realized that I could do better than the relationship I had with her. And so that's when I started going for that next level and trying to implement, like, all right, let's do more self-help reading. Let's do more personal development reading. Let's look into those other mythologies that I was looking at, and kind of upgrading the experience, because I also wasn't satisfied with base level functionality. I wanted more at that point, but it's, a lot of people use the onion as a metaphor. Like, once you process that first layer, there's still a layer underneath it. And so it took me about 2 years to get from that dark, dysfunctional place to baseline functional. And then from there, I just built on that with more and more.
That's a beautiful way to illustrate, because it's always a two-sided growth. It's you go deep and you go next level, deep and next level. So it's like you're growing inwards, but you're also growing outwards. And when you work in the inside, everything outside changes as well.
Mhm.
And so, you know, anger, I can relate. It was my addiction before I started my healing journey. Some people get addicted to food, to sex, to drugs. Mine was anger. And one of the, I think, where trust comes in is that a lot of people. So I'm relating this to those who are finding it hard to open up, because even for some, just being able to express anger needs a level of trust. Because we can feel quite ashamed, we can feel quite guilty, we can feel quite fearful of being judged, being pariah, being ostracized for so much darkness and so much anger that's inside of us. And that's what they do, isn't it? They are there for how you need them, whether you need them to just absorb the shock or to talk back, to say something back. And it's trusting your just your emotions that it needs to come out. It was not an intellectually consciously created kind of intention, but you were just needing to um, to outpour that. And I love
Mhm.
how you were the awareness of this is I'm on the baseline functionality, and now I'm ready for the next level. And so let's bring it on. And so
Mhm.
I guess it's a segue to what I want to ask you next. You chose the business name Liminal Clarity, and I think for you, with the brief conversation we've had before, it's you've really come to a place where healing
Mhm.
is a combination of a lot of different things that can work for you. And by things, we're talking here, for those who may not be familiar, of different modalities that you can combine that's really going to allow you to access your full potential and go really deep into who you really are and what you're capable of. For many people, it's many different things. And so for me, it's a combination of moving meditation, yoga, journaling, and shamanism, etc., etc. But Claire, I want to let me ask you about this word liminal, because you talk about that it is the space in between. So without going too much further into it, tell me more about what liminal is.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I originally fell in love with the word in college. I was in a Victorian literature class, and they were talking about the liminal times of day, which is dawn and dusk. It's the time between day and night. And I just thought this whole idea of having a word to describe that in between time, that in between space, was just a beautiful concept. And so I've always loved the word liminal since then. But then I was going through a rebranding process for my business back in, I guess it was 2020. And I realized that back then I was helping more with business consulting and business development, because at that point I had had a lot of experience with the entrepreneurship world. I started my first business back in 2014. And I was helping my clients specifically through the business transitions that you had to go through in order to scale up and not continue trading your time for money on like one-on-one kind of like delegation systems, automation systems, things that allowed you to become more of a business owner than someone working in a business. And so we were talking about how I loved this transition part of my work. And I told her just randomly that I loved the word liminal. And she was like, that's what you do. She was like, you bring clarity to these liminal spaces. And I was like my brain just exploded. I was like, yes. And so that's when I transitioned to that more specific focus on these transitional moments in the work that I do.
Hmm. And so in our life, what does transitional moments, what do they look like? What do we go through? What do we think about? How are we feeling? Give us some
Mm.
examples.
Yeah, I mean, they can be big or they can be small. Like small transitions are like waking up in the morning, starting your work day, having lunch, maybe your commute to work, your commute home from work is a liminal transition. A lot of us are working from home nowadays. And so, how do you transition yourself from your working at home mindset to your relaxing at home mindset? Those are all examples of the small transitions that we go through on a day-to-day basis. But if we're talking about big life transitions, we're talking about divorces, we're talking about moving homes, we're talking about changing careers, starting businesses, even things like milestone birthdays, like turning 50, turning 60. These are big life, almost like identity transitions that we grapple with that society doesn't really have support structures for. Like we're given weddings, we're given funerals, and we're given graduation ceremonies. But those are really the only three main transition rituals or ceremonies that society provides us with. But we need support throughout all of these big transitions that we experience throughout our lives. And so that's the gap that I'm looking to fill is like, I've I've worked this terrain, I've moved 18 times in the last 32 years. I've transitioned between careers 12 different times. I'm a child of divorced parents. And so I understand all of these transitions very intimately and love working in this liminal space that we continually find ourselves in, because as I've said before, life is the ultimate liminal space between birth and death. So we're constantly having to cope with navigating these liminal experiences, these liminal spaces, and it's beneficial for us to develop a skill set in it.
Wow. When you said life is the ultimate liminal space, the transition between birth and death, I'm thinking like, well, no wonder why we often feel like we're out of breath. Like, there's just like, you know, sometimes people use the word, just give me a break or something like that. It's a bit like that, isn't it? Because we haven't learned to, in your own words, ritualize and honor the small transitions as well as the really big ones. But for our conversation today, I'd like to focus on the big ones
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have as much time. But, for women, OMG, we are the transition queens without being the transition queens. Like we just wing it. We go
Mm-hmm.
wingit.com without the real wingit.com, which leaves us
Yeah,
breathless, overwhelmed, burnt
totally.
out, and withdraw. And so how do you, let's focus on one particular transition, for example, and because this is about Women Unleashed, creating intergenerational transformation by helping people go through similar adversities that we've gone through. So, if a transition between a woman who's gone through extreme life adversities, and they could be abuse, PTSD, depression, whatnot, and they've transitioned from that space of being a wounded victim to a wounded healer. But the transition to how do I now put this out to the world? Like, how do I then? Because a lot of with the clients that I work with, for example, they know um, what they are gifted with. They
Mm-hmm.
know what they've gone through, and that's one thing. But the thing about how am I now going to offer this to the world is the other thing that's really unclear, and it's really a little bit daunting for them. So there's a transition phase there.
Mhm.
What can you offer in that situation?
Yeah, well, this is actually one of the tools that I found after that 2 year period with my counselor. I was in 2016, I was introduced to the concept of the healthy mind platter. And this is one of the tools and frameworks that I find absolutely foundational to all abilities to transition effectively, because you need a foundation to support you. Otherwise, you're building a house on quicksand.
Mm.
And so the healthy mind platter is basically, it's neuroscience based. It's based on decades of neuroscience. I'm a neuroscience nerd. It's one of the methodologies that I absolutely fell in love with during my 8 year transformation. And it's basically 7 areas of your life to prioritize so that your needs are taken care of. So that opens up more space for what you need to do out in the world. And so we're talking about needs like social time, like making sure that you have solid social support structures that are positive, that are fulfilling, that are nourishing and nurturing for you. But we're also talking about playtime, having time to play and experiment and explore, stuff like that. We're also talking about downtime, daydreaming, letting your mind wander. Like we need that. Our brains need that. Our bodies need that for creativity, for innovation. Like we need that time. But also talking about meditation, time in is super important.
Mm.
And that's where we're going to have internal reflections and have that more internal sense of being so that we understand who we really are inside and how we react to the world outside of us, so that we can react more with intentional forethought rather than impulsive reaction.
Mm.
And then we're also talking about things like sleep time. We all need sleep. That is a need biologically, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. We need sleep. Physical time, moving your body, because your brain needs this movement throughout your day-to-day life. And then I think the final one is focus time. And so making sure that you have activities that put you into a flow state. And so flow state is basically where competence meets challenge. And so you're not too competent at the task, but you're also not too challenged at the task. And that's where we lose track of time,
Mm.
because we're so engrossed in the activity and so involved in it that we can just go on. But that's where I really start with foundational, like how we allot and invest our time and energies throughout the week, and make sure that we nourish ourselves and make sure we don't neglect our needs along the way, because then we're going to be able to grow more. We're going to be able to achieve more, be more creative, be more innovative if we have those basic foundations taken care of to begin with.
Wow, I love that. I love that. I wish we had more time, but when you talk about, for example, the flow state, like it's like a dance between the challenge and the competence, and it's so spot on. You lose track of time because you are challenged enough, but you're also competent enough, and both
Mhm.
of them are dancing together, and you just lose track of time. But
Mhm.
the way that you've given me the healthy minds platter then is what I'm hearing in my heart, not in my mind, but in my heart, is that um, often I dare say here that 90% of the time when we think about transition in the dictionary based kind of word is that we transit from one place to the other, and being conditioned by the linear way of education, we kind of think of it as a straight line. And so there's this tendency to be what do you call this, like
Myopic.
you're in a tube, like
Mhm.
you there's a tendency to think this way, when
Mhm.
really it's almost like what you're describing is allowing the mind to have everything that it needs, which is the opposite of thinking just the one linear kind of way to transition the liminal space from what you're giving me and from what I'm hearing in my heart is allowing not just your brain but your entire neurological system, which includes your body, your gut
Mm-hmm.
health, your heart health, your physical conditioning, allowing the whole entire neurological system to be in flow together, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to transition and be in a beautiful liminal space.
Yeah, because change happens at the speed of safety. And so when you're able to create these safe foundations that you can carry with you in the midst of transition, then you're going to be able to change quicker, more effectively, happier, in a funner, more enjoyable way because you feel safe all along the way. It's not like you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and like questioning everything, because like then you're going to be unmoored. Then you're going to be destabilized and uncertain and unsteady. Where if you bring these foundations along with you, you have that safety net, you have that hammock to carry you through the transition instead of you doing it in a, because that's how you re-traumatize yourself. If you push yourself way too far outside of your comfort zone without any support systems in the place, then you're just going to re-traumatize yourself and burn out and exhaust yourself and deplete yourself and lose the progress that you're looking to make.
Oh, I just love what you're talking about. What did you say? Change happens at the
Happens.
speed of safety. OMG. I'm going to write that down.
Mhm.
That's I'm going to tell my kids about this. But what you just described then, Claire, to me is I read this book 2 years ago, I think it was. It's called Ask and You Shall Ask and
Mhm.
It Shall Be Given by Abraham Hicks, I think. And it
Mhm.
just talked about the two steps to manifest what you want, which is one is to set the intention and say to the universe, this is what I wish, whether verbally, in written form, or energetically. And then the second step is to get out of the way and let it happen. And I think
Mhm.
that's exactly what I heard from you is that um, what you want comes to you when you're not in a state of resistance or frustration, because you're in a state of safety. Everything is in flow. And you talked about the 8 years of frustration that you went through.
Mhm.
It's probably a really really great example is that you didn't have the sense of safety, you didn't have the healthy mind platter all in put in place, and so you were re-traumatizing yourself by thinking more, what's wrong with me, why can't I just get this right, I know I'm great, but there's just that energy of frustration and resistance, and so
Exactly.
you were in your way, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, exactly. And it was last year that all of the pieces clicked into place for me. Like I had gotten out of a toxic relationship at the end of 2019. It was toxic and abusive. It was horrible. And so I created this safe space for myself in my new apartment during the pandemic. I like retreated socially. I made this safe nest for myself. And it gave me this safety container to finally integrate all of these pieces and make it a holistic, comprehensive whole for myself. And that's when things changed for me, because I was finally able to create that stable, safe container for myself. And that's where all the pieces clicked into place. And since then, I've been calling it an existential orgasm. Because it's just lighting up all of the pieces of myself and allowing myself to flourish because all of my needs are taken care of.
That's beautiful. I mean, there are a portion of the world population that they are not as receptive to the means of healing through uh, more to a little bit more to the holistic side, because they need something that they can really wrap their heads around with, and this is really delicious for me because it's practical, but it's also really deep and nurturing, the way that you've described that, having to
Mhm.
come to that place of existential orgasm.
Mhm. Yeah, I call it analytical woo
I
because it's
love that.
combining neuroscience and spirituality and like my decade of trauma informed therapy practices and all of these different facets and lenses that we can look at, but it has the same grounded result that is game changing.
You know, I'm thinking about my 20-year-old. When you say analytical woo, I think that she's going to really resonate with that. And this is what I mean. There are a certain number of us that just need, just need that resonation. That hey, this is something that I can do, and it's beautiful. I love what you are offering and what you do actually. So Claire, how can we have more of you and listen to more of, you know, your stories and your frameworks? How can we actually connect with you?
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in learning more specifically about the Healthy Mind Platter, I actually have a free PDF assessment that you can use for yourself to see how well you're doing in the 7 areas. And that can be just a starting point for you. So if anyone's interested in that PDF, please hit me up. I'll send it to you. But more generally, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube under Liminal Clarity. But all of my links are available at linktree/liminal clarity.
Amazing. The easiest for me there would be to go to Instagram or Facebook under Liminal Clarity, and I would be getting the PDF to assess myself on Healthy Mind Platter. This has been a beautiful, beautiful morning for me. And I was just gonna mention I will have a little bit of a liminal space tonight for a 24-hour flight. So that would be I'll be thinking about your framework actually. Like, okay, so if I was Claire, then what would I make use of this liminal space for?
Yeah, pilgrimages are really huge for liminal spaces.
Amazing. Thank you, Claire. I'll be jumping onto your website because I will really need that tonight. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you listening. We love you, and we are always here for you. So please connect with Claire, connect with myself if any of the things that we talked about resonated with you, or if you have any questions that you want to ask in private. Have a beautiful day. Have a beautiful weekend. Goodbye, everybody, and we will see you again very, very soon.